So let's move on to the polishing of the attack animation. And for this, I want to cover briefly before we jump into Maya what's the usual steps I follow after we have the blocking plus or first pass moving onto the spline. So as you can see here in the notepad, usually I try to break it down. Obviously depends on production and the amount of like iterations you usually have for the project. But let's say, roughly speaking, we had the first pass, which was the blocking and blocking plus we did before. Then we move into a second pass, which is the spline. And then once we had this like approved, we just move into the third pass, which is the polish one, where everything is logged. You know, we have like the final timing and the final flow, anticipation, all that is like now done and works fine in game, and then we can just focus on leave the animation as polished as possible. So first of all, once we had that blocking or blocking plus pass done, the first thing we want to do is like that export into the game so we can try out and see how it works and it plays. And 3 key points in my opinion that are really nice to check is like if it works with the current gameplay we are looking for the game, if it fits the design requirements, and if it feels good overall. So this is very important because sometimes you can, depends obviously on the engine, you can export things in a step. Sometimes it's gonna go spline, so it could look a bit weird because interpolation and stuff. But yeah, in here we want to check that if that kind of like overall first pass is going in the right direction, or we need to rethink, you know, and do like major tweaks. And here obviously the first thing we're gonna do is like pass, you know, the from step into auto tangents. And here what I did after you check the auto tangents, you can see here like is the one on the left. It's kind of it feels a bit slow, feels a bit junky, especially the anticipation. I feel it needs more impact. So what I did here is like we have kind of like some feedback, some key points that we want to apply to this second pass together with the usual approach. So the feedback is, as we mentioned, we want first anticipation. Right now it feels a bit slow. Also, we want to give more impact into the hit. You know, it has to be more powerful. So probably I'm going to speed up a bit that part. I want to give a bit more feel to the squash and the stretch, especially the anticipation during that jump. You know, that's going to help like build up a really good momentum before the hit. And at the end, although this is not very important or key moment at this stage, is going to be the overall flow during the recovery. You know, we want that nice arc, you know, and that nice weight, you know, when he moved the sword. So having this feedback and things I wanna check, especially here in this spline pass, is kind of like almost a mix between like checking things and going a layer approach. So overall we want to check like the center of gravity feels good, you know, do a pass on that, especially now we have the attack. We can add some nice secondary motion in here. We want as well like double check legs, chest and arms, head, and push that stamina bit. That's usually like the checkpoints I like to do for this spline pass. So having that in mind, as you can, as we said here, the first thing we did was do a pass on timing. So as you can see, I did a big like speed up on anticipation. You know, here you reach that kind of like stretching points around frame 22 instead of frame 29. So around 8 to 10 frames, you know, accelerate quite a bit. So for the timing, and also having a bit more of a holding here, you know, right before the hit. And once we contact the slash, it happens a bit faster, you know, so gives more impact into the hit, which is something that we really want, especially with heavy weapons. You want that really big anticipation and then boom, release. Then similar amount of time here at the end, because it's gonna give us a really nice window to add some extra follow through and subtle motion. It's gonna give more like keep the character alive and not locked in the same pose as you can see here in the blocking plus. And then for the recovery, yeah, as we said, like it's mainly when it comes to timing, speed up the transitions. You know, when you go to A, B, and then C, you know, instead of going linear, you can see here how we speed up the transition, have a bit of hold, and then the same boom, speed up here, you know. So we want that kind of like non-even linear timing. We want to kind of like favor where we're coming from and where we're going to, and that's always going to help, no matter what type of transition we're doing. So that would be regarding timing. As you can see here, it makes quite a difference, especially during the anticipation of the hit. It doesn't feel this floaty, this kind of like even timing. That happens a lot of time when we pass from a step preview into spline. Sometimes you don't feel, because if you can see here in the blocking plus, boom, here it feels alright, but then yeah, we switch back into spline and it's kind of slow. So that's one of the things. Then another thing, as I said, like the hips, that's something, the center of gravity, that is really important. So I'm going to show here, like especially on the y-axis. So if we see, especially after the hit in here, once it hit, in the blocking plus we have these really like even and flat tangents, and here where we add on the blocking plus is this really nice up and down that is going to help with the settle. So I like to exaggerate when it hits during the impact, how the hips going down in here. As you can see here in the graph editor, we exaggerate that quite a bit compared to the original pose, and then you have a nice bounce and a nice settle. You don't need to go super crazy with the tangents and stuff. Just like play a bit with the timing and the spacing. As you can see, just with this, we get a really nice settle in here after the attack. That combined with a bit of forward motion as well, that's gonna help a lot. So we want that. Also, another thing is when I talk about the transitions. Here, as you can see in the other one, is more like a linear transition up and down, and where this like boom, accelerate here, favoring where we are going, boom, the high pose, and then boom, drops and bounce quite quick. So that is gonna give us this really nice going from A to B in a better way, in that it flows more natural and it has more weight into the animation. Boom. You can see here on the hips, especially at the end. Boom, this kind of like holding here, and boom, and the nice bouncing here. That give us out of weight combined together with the sword. One thing I wanted to mention here that sometimes I like to do, especially when you're focusing the body, is like you can pick the prop and we can create a layer sword. Then you can hide it for now, because although for me the weapons is key, but at this stage that we have kind of like the weapon blocked out in the key poses we want, I like to do as well to not get distracted by it, especially when I'm like focusing on the torso, on the head, for the first pass. So I think this is a good tip to use. And then once we had that sort, it's like, okay, let's show the weapon back and have a look at it. So that regarding the hip, as you can see as well, I try to add a bit of offset now in the keys. One thing I like to do when approaching the spline pad is not only just start like adding a lot of keys. I try to keep still like a minimum amount of keys as possible, and then start offsetting, playing around, so we don't hit the exact key moments on the same frame, and that way to get like kind of like a bit of, for example, a bit of a wobble here. You can see how boom, the hip, the rotation gets to the highest point a bit later, so we reach first the translation up, and then boom, we have this really nice wobbling here. Boom, that's gonna give us a bit of extra texture to the animation. Same with the foot. Like this is a good opportunity as well to start like polishing a bit more the transition, especially when we go from A to B. You can see here how the foot doesn't go as linear. We accelerate, boom, it goes like this. I start like easing, boom, accelerate, and we kind of like try to pay attention a bit more, into the arcs of the foot. So if you see here on the blocking plus how the foot like goes back, up, front, and then down, so it's almost like one direction at a time. And here we have this kind of like nice, when it goes up, when it goes back, sorry, it start like going up with the ankle, so we have this more organic and a bit of like rounded like arc in here trajectory. So this is something I really like to pay attention as well. First, obviously starting with the hips. I wanna avoid, like, for example, going back, and then up, you know, rather like have a nice arc into that motion. That's gonna, like here, for example, as well. You know, you can see here how this is going up, back, and then kind of up slowly, you know. So it's kind of linear, and you lose a bit of the momentum. So here we make sure we have a nice arc that will refine properly later on during the polish. And same here, you can see how it goes like a nice circle. It goes down, boom, and it circles back, you know. This is something we want to pay attention to, because those arcs, exaggerating them a tiny bit, is going to give us such a like organic fluid motion. Also, another thing I like to play around is like we block out as well a tiny bit with here, with the ankle control. But yeah, now is a good time to start like saying with the transitions, you know, play a bit more with that. You know, add a bit of easy in, easy out, you know, play when it lands as well, to try, you know, to clean a first pass, clean the contacts, you know, to make the foot feeling a bit more solid, you know. So that's something that we want to like pay attention as well. So that would be like regarding the feet. So you can see it's not that linear, weightless, you know. For example, here as well, still not properly planted. We can probably make it like plant the feet here in one more frame, but that's gonna be for later for the polish. But at least, for example, we get here, as you can see, boom, have this nice stretch leg, boom, and almost get that impact already. You're starting to feel in that impact, you know. You see the, if we look back here at the blocking plus, how it goes up and then goes linear, 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 linear. So it kind of feels a bit like weightless. Then when we had the feet worked like that. When it comes to the structure, we kept the same as the original blocking. It's just like playing with those transitions. Then we move into the torso, and yeah, for the torso, as this AK, sorry, quite simple as well. You know, what I try to like have now is a bit more of like circular motion, especially when it comes to this anticipation, you know. So it goes down a bit and then start opening up, boom, and goes up. So as you can see, still not many more keys. So try to keep it simple and play between this and the graphator in here to get this like nice and smooth. Sometimes, depending on the controller we're using and the type of animation we're using, it's good to have the graphator super nice and clean. Sometimes, you know, because gimbal issues and stuff, I don't worry too much if, for example, like this, you know, this is like, oh, maybe it would be nice if this was like here or like this with clean, but sometimes this, it doesn't help and you lose a bit of the texture of the animation. So yeah, I like to do a pass on the graph editor, but also like keep an eye especially on the final like result on the screen. So yeah, the torso, we set this, and the same here, you know, instead of just keeping, as you can see in the blocking plus, how it hits the pose super quick and it stays there. Here we delayed a bit of that, so it kind of like use the weight of the sword, you know, to go into this rotation, you know, in the y-axis, and it give us a really nice follow through here. Just still some sliding here on the chest, quite linear, but that's alright for now. And same here, we want to kind of like get a really nice base when it comes to rotation, going up, you know. So we open up that and then boom, we drop. And again, we want to like, especially in this type of motion that we have a big weapon, we want to exaggerate, you know, play with the arcs as much as possible. Once we have the chest, again, I like to combine that together with the arms and the shoulders. And here the arms, we're probably gonna clean a bit more later on, like to get a bit more like arc during the wind up here. But yeah, overall the main thing for me for the arms was to have, I like to toggle the motion trail of both arms, or in this case, as we are driving the motion with this one, with the left arm, just the wrist of the left arm, and then we toggle that and try to have like a clean base. And once I have that, I do a pass on the weapon. I still don't want to go super crazy with the weapon, just enough to make it, as you can see here, we have a few in between here that makes, you know, how it slides across the ground, you know, and it goes a bit smoother, especially during the impact. But we still don't worry too much about perfect clean arcs, because that's gonna come later. You know, we just want like the feeling to be like better and avoid some like junky motions. Like for example here in the recovery, you can see still some to tweak, but it's kind of like nice arc in here compared to the blocking plus. As you can see here, how it's, you know, a bit more like jittery issues. So this is something that I like to do a decent pass during this spline pass in here. And once we had that, you know, I move into the head. And again, the head, same as with the cycles, I don't want to go too crazy, just to keep it like flowing nicely. One of the things I like to keep is like the contact in here, you know, as I mentioned before, when you are hitting, you know, to keep you know, the eyesight towards the target. And in this case, because it's quite heavy, I feel like yeah, keep like a bit of like settled motion in here after the attack to kind of like help, you know, it's kind of like a chain effect. So first we hit with the translation rotation of the hips, then the torso follows, and then we have the reaction on the head. So you have like kind of like that chain, you know, ABC, that give us like a really nice motion overall, you know, and it makes it feel more organic. And with that, as you can see, just kind of like checking those few steps, you know, mainly timing, overall cleanup pass, you know, like making sure the arcs were fine, and a quick pass on everything, so it feels like a bit more solid following the design feedback. Yeah, it already like looks so much better. So once we have this spline pass, we can just export again and put in the game and see yeah, if now it hits those like requirements that we really want to like fit. So now we have the spline pass submitted, you know, we exported, we put in the game, and it works great. You know, the design and the leads are like happy with the timing, you know, it feels good. So once we have this pass locked, we can move into the polish. And when we move into the polish stage, we want to make sure that those elements, like, you know, the timing, the footwork, all that stuff is like locked and working as intended. So then we can just focus on like, you know, like in those extra days we have to make the animation as polished as possible. And for that, this is my go-to list. Sometimes depend on the type of character, if you have more controllers or less, it can vary, you know, I can add more stuff, or maybe I don't need to worry about some of the other stuff, but this is as briefly, you know, as a general go-to list for things type to polish and to make sure they work good. And those are general cleanup. Again, I make sure now the curves look fine, the general animation, there's not like pops, you know. I want to avoid definitely here like flat tangents, you know. All the controllers have to be always like even with a tiny bit of subtle motion. You want to avoid like controllers that are completely rigid to a certain amount of frames. Final tweaks on timing, maybe like increase a few frames the anticipation, or maybe tweak a tiny bit during the recovery, during the transition. So we don't want to mess up the overall timing, but within those ranges, maybe fine tuning a tiny bit. Dynamic poses. So here is like when I go the extra mile, sometimes within the base animation, sometimes I use layers to play around with it, but push those poses a tiny bit more, you know, now with fresh eyes, and get them like as best as possible. Footwork and clean contacts, this is key. You want that to feel solid and with weight, because that's gonna give us a really nice feel of the animation, especially not only on single attacks, but later on if you're doing combos, you know, from A to B to C. If you have like a really good plan, footwork is gonna feel and flow really good. Follow throughs, you know, together with the settles, since as we mentioned with the spline, like the relationship between the hips, torso and head, you know, that chain to feels nice. Again, to avoid controllers to be static and rigid, you know, with nice moving holes, and all this small secondary motion is going to help a lot. Weapon arcs, this is key for me. I think it's very important, especially in the end of the stage of the polish, to always make sure your arcs of the weapon work perfect and are clean. And sometimes you have to go frame by frame, but it's gonna be worth it because that's gonna level up your animation and take it to the next level. And last but not least is secondary motion when it comes to clothing, armor plates and stuff, but that we'll cover that later on in another chapter, together with the run and the walk, as I mentioned before. So that way we can focus on how I approach that, especially when it comes to hanky animation. So once we had this, a quick thing I wanted to mention is I really like to use even more layers here when it comes to, for example, focus on parts. So here I now go all in with the layer approach, so you grab the two controllers and you make sure, here, for example, as you can see, there's not much different, just, cleaning a bit the arcs, adding a few frames, to favoring a bit where we're going and where we come from, those are really good, to soften a bit or to help with the easing and easy out, something like that. Sometimes I tweak a bit more, sometimes we just add a few keys, because everything is locked at this stage, it's more than enough. So yeah, usually go layer approach. So start with the hips, legs, torso and arms, and then the head. So as you can see here, if we see the overall timing, it's pretty much now the same. The main thing is, like as we said, like a few tweaks, especially at the end. You can see how here the transition into the recovery, when it comes to the hold and then the down and up, there's very fine small tweaks, but that makes that extra difference. It's this 10% that's gonna make it's gonna take the animation into the next level. So we have that. Same with the foot, and again, like, we make sure that the arcs, now the footwork, as we said before. For example, here you can see, boom, how we keep it's kind of like nice stretch leg to give more weight, and then boom, we plant. And as you can see here in this frame, we have the general rule of thumb of like ankle or heel, foot, and then the toes, and with that, boom, we give more weight. If you see the other animation, it takes 1 or 2 more frames to plant, and that is gonna give us like a more solid foundation for then, boom, release the attack. Same with the left foot, how as well moves around a bit and it feels more organic, when it comes to like taking off and landing as well. We want to make sure there's no clipping, there's no sliding, unnecessary sliding on the foot. That's gonna help us a lot. Same with transition. Now it's a good time as well to start offsetting keys with a translation and rotation here. So it's not maybe translate and then rotate the ankle. It's like you have a bit of combining and play around with that. Same when it comes back in here, the right foot, you can see nice arc in here if we track the tip of the toe, and how we have this nice easy into the next pose. Things like that is what we want to focus. Same in here, we want to make sure, it's going to start pivoting from the toe, so we want to make sure that works fine. So yeah, sometimes you can see here, sometimes we don't need that many keys. Sometimes I go like frame by frame, and that's totally fine. It's whatever is needed or your approach, to make it like the best result possible. Had that, then we move into the torso, and for this I wanted to mention as well that something I really like to do is use locators. So if we hide this, I like to not only on the hips and the legs, but because the pivot point is fine, but on the chest, instead of the pivot point of the chest, which is literally in the center, I like to put a locator here, and that's gonna help me to kind of like, if I get the motion trail, see here how we can make sure the arcs works fine. Here, as we mentioned, you have this really nice arc, boom, and the motion overall, flows nicely. Same in here, we want to avoid some like pops or like, if it's coming here, that all of the sudden you have this kind of like in one frame moving like this. So yeah, this is a good way for me to make sure all the controllers, work and flow nicely. It takes a bit of extra time, but at the end of the day, for me, it's worth it. Same with the head. really like to do as well on the top of the head to make sure, because sometimes, especially if you were like instead of local, like instead of word paint local, sometimes the head can go a bit crazy, and then you end up with like especially side to side motion that you want to keep it, especially in this type of attack, like quite contained and kind of focus into the target. So yes, you can see here, you have a really nice rotation on the torso. It's clean, a lot of arcs. The transition here as well, it flows nicer, this rotation. It's not like rotate and then up, kind of like blends together. And then, yeah, as we mentioned, the arms. And here, once I have the left arm clean, we make sure the arc in here, it works nice. After nice, here I increase actually a bit the, you can see if we go here, how the one without the locator, how it's a bit jitter, the sword. So I make sure first with the arms and then with the sword that that we have a really nice smooth motion. Like clearly with that. And once we had that, I move into the sword before tackling. That will cover that later, the right arm, that I'll leave that for later. So what I like to do is, like, once we had that, I like to jump, as I said, onto the arcs of the sword. So for me it's very important that this slow the arc. Yeah, this works fine. As you can see, overall, it's like clean motions, there you go. So refresh this. There you go. So we have like really nice here the anticipation, how it goes up, as well here, from the front, how this arc like flows nicely. So, and same with the recovery, as you can see here, how it goes, dragging the sword on the floor, boom, and goes up nicely. So this is something that for me is very important, and it's gonna help a lot. And sometimes you can see, if we go here on the controller, it's this one, I pretty much have almost every frame, because not in all the rotations I have a key, but because I'm offsetting and stuff, sometimes I end up with a lot of frames in here. But yeah, I want to make sure now the sword drags nicely. We have a bit of easing and easy out, as you can see here, compared to the other one, how I start like slowing better, favoring the original position, and then drags nicely. And especially, I always like to cover these few frames, boom, nicely in here, boom, during the hit, to make sure the hit goes nice. And same with the settle as well in here. Instead of keeping the sword lock, I try to add a bit of arcs in here, so it feels like alive and not completely locked. And as well, here we go back slowly, avoid any clipping, and it, like here, for example, that in the spline I didn't mind much, because it's still like a spline pass, so we don't need to worry too much about that. We just want the overall motion. So put this here, and swing here where I make sure it's like there's no jitter, and then I drag a bit more the sword, and boom, and add a nice bounce at the end, boom. That's gonna easy out into the final positioning here, boom. And as you can see, it's those small things that it's almost like go one by one the controller to make sure everything is fine, but it's gonna make such a difference, because as you can see, it gives that extra edge compared to the animation, especially when your eyes are gonna go into the sword, and the sword feels more like smooth, more polished, and with more intention as well, especially during the hit. And that's good. Another thing I like to do in here is to kind of like try to find a camera as well at this stage, especially, for example, in this case, if it's for a shoot for a reel, for example, or to showcase in a portfolio piece, you can try to find a nice like composition. So in this case, what I like to do is we're gonna attack forward, and the kind of line of action, is here, kind of like how it goes, it kind of flows, the silhouette. I don't have any lights on the here, no. So what I like to do sometimes is like turn on the silhouette mode. You can hide the ground. So if you turn on, if you don't have any lights, I'm gonna create here for the ground. Let's put floor then. There you go. So one of the things I really like to do is like if you don't have any lights on the scene and you press 7, which is use a light, it's gonna create this kind of like silhouette mode, and this is really nice, to help, for example, design the camera, or not also this, like if you're as a general polishing, I like it to sometimes just check like this, because it's gonna be really nice to don't focus too much on the detail of the armor, all the texture, all the noise, and you just focus on the overall like silhouette. And you can see like, oh, I like this, I need more momentum here, more impact there, so this is something that I really like to use. And actually at all the stages. So yeah, then we go back here, turn off the lights, and as I said, here something like that for the camera. I like to use that, and yeah, once we have that, you can like find a nice angle, and then you can add a bit of camera motion, later on when it comes to like the presentation for the attack, for the demo reel. But yeah, with that like that, if we go back to the spline, as you can see, let's hide this. It's those small tweaks that we take the animation to the next level. And one of the things as well I wanted to mention before wrapping up this chapter is, if you go here, we constrain this left arm, into the wrist, to move to follow the arm. So what I like to do now is I go and I bake that and I delete the constraint, so now if I move the arm, it's completely disconnected. And what I like to do with that is that you can go frame by frame, or you can create a layer, animation layer. So you can say, for example, okay, from here to here, I want to tweak this. So I say here, and you say, and here is fine. Here it's like, okay, I'm gonna add a bit of motion and reposition a bit the hand, to make it not be that broken as it was in the spline, because in some poses, especially like things like here, where is it? Yeah, sometimes you can get clipping, or you can get like a weird like wrist deformation. So I like to spend a bit of time now. Beginning with layers is very easy, because then you can like reduce a bit of motion, the weight on the layer, so that's easy to tweak. And with that I make sure the right arm, it feels natural, and the grip feels like solid and powerful. Then I'm gonna hide this, and yeah, and once we have that, we have our animation nicely polished. Again, with polishing, this is something that you can spend here like forever, always like, oh, tweak a bit here, one frame there, one frame more, exaggerate this arc and stuff like that. But something like this feels like quite solid to me, quite nice. So yeah, happy with the result and ready to move on to the secondary motion.